now my pleasure to hand over to Victor Galaz, Deputy Director at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, who will be moderating the United Nations Development Programme's UNDP Hour today with a focus on the growing field of climate innovation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victor.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the UNDP Hour at the Stockholm+50 Climate Hub, a stage and an online space available for you before, during, and after the climate conference Stockholm+50 until World Environmental Day on 5th of June. My name is Victor Galaz. I'm the Deputy Director at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, an interdisciplinary centre that advances research on governance of socio-ecological systems based at Stockholm University. Now, during this hour, we will talk about climate innovation. And a little later, you will hear from young climate leaders who will give their insights into what is happening today in the Stockholm+50 conference. But more about that later. Innovation. Innovation is often seen as key to achieve a stable climate system and a sustainable future for all. But what do we mean when we talk about innovation? Is it technological, economic, social, or all of the above? Who needs to innovate? And how do we make sure that innovation benefits all and not just those who can afford it? And lastly, don't we already know what to do? Maybe we need less innovation and more action. With me today, we have the following experts and impact entrepreneurs: Lisen Oliw, who's the Managing Director of Nordic countries at Norrsken; Fiekowsky, physicist and engineer, serial entrepreneur and author; and Kewmars Kazemzadeh, who's the founder of Flexpenser; and Cecilia Repinski, founder of Green Asset Wallet. So welcome. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you? I'm just going to get my notes. So here we go. I'm going to start with you, Lisen.
Sure.
About innovation. So Norrsken House.
Yes.
It's a so-called impact hub, and you create infrastructure for small and medium-sized businesses to have a climate impact. Why does the world need impact hubs like Norrsken?
So first of all, we don't only focus on climate impact, we focus on any impact, because the world has a lot of problems. But as you say, climate is the one that's closest to people's minds, and we have a big portion of teams in the house focusing on climate. Why we exist from the start is just very simple. I think a lot of people agree with me that the acceleration isn't going fast enough. Innovation is key, and innovation is often related to tech. So the impact entrepreneurs that reside in our house, what's different about them, or what they all have in common, is that in one way or another they're trying to solve a world problem. They see it as a brilliant business opportunity. And we actually see that those who scale very fast, they also scale very successful businesses. And they do it almost always using tech, because you seem to need tech in order to scale innovations quickly. And if we didn't have a hub, because starting a business is hard, being a small entrepreneurs, on average, we have about 550 people in Stockholm right now. We have 2 houses, 3 soon, but in Stockholm it's about 550 people. They comprise 160 companies. That means on average, people are 2 to 3 people per team. That's small businesses. It's tricky to be an entrepreneur and a small one. So you need the infrastructure. You need access to the capital, you need access to working space, you need access to a network that can help you grow and help you with expertise that you may not possess within your team, that is expensive to purchase from other places.
What I'm thinking is also that, the tech sector, right? So,
yes.
So what is the role of government? I mean, is the tech sector and private sector going to solve this by itself? How do you look at that?
I think that's the million-dollar question. I couldn't possibly address things that big of a question, but I don't know. I know that we have cutting-edge impact ideas. These ideas, these entrepreneurs, they get capital, they get attention, and they do scale their businesses. There has to be a sort of a faith in the idea itself, because everybody seems to agree that we need new solutions. And where politics comes in, I don't know. But politics has a strong will to change as well. So at some point in step, I would say they do.
But another thing, so Stockholm+50 and sustainability is a global issue, right? But we also have global north and the global south. So what I'm thinking, Norrsken, you have your headquarters here in Sweden. Do you see a risk that the type of innovation that you work with sort of is based and fulfills the need of people of the global south. How do you get that other perspective into your work?
Yes, of course. I mean, solutions and networks can only expand so far. That's why we have a house in Rwanda, in Kigali as well, that we opened last year, where we try to do the same things that we do in Stockholm, and Stockholm is trying to cover the Nordics, where we now in Rwanda is trying to, in the same way, support entrepreneurs for Eastern Africa.
That's great. I have a similar question to you, Peter.
Yes.
Fiekowsky. You're an astrophysicist. You've been called a serial entrepreneur. You also published a new book.
Yes.
And you spent considerable time in Silicon Valley. It's always Silicon Valley. Whenever we talk about climate innovation, we talk about Silicon Valley. Why do we need climate innovation from your point of view?
Well, you really brought it up in your introduction to the hour, which is we want a climate that everyone can survive long term. And so the big innovation that came to my attention was that our current goals of trying to stay below 2 degrees or 1.5, if you think about it, no one has ever claimed that humans can survive that. Or we might, or maybe Bill Gates' children might, but not everybody. And so the goal really that we want, that I wanted when I was in college, is to get CO2 to levels that humans have survived long term. And to do that while our structures are in place, our industry and ecosystems. And so the innovation here is actually innovating a definition of the problem. So although we are all going to reduce emissions and do the energy transition, that's just a small part of it. The big part is getting the trillion tons of CO2 back out so that we actually have the same climate we had while we developed agriculture and civilization. And what's amazing about innovation is that once you specify the problem, the solutions become visible. And it turns out that we have the technology we need, we have the finance we need to actually get CO2 back to below 300 by 2050. And what's needed now is the leadership, which is why the UN is here, why your Stockholm Resilience Center is here, to provide that leadership. And I hope that listeners, and especially the youth, take on calling for the goal of restoring the climate, not just part-way reducing emissions, but reducing emissions plus the big thing of getting all the way back.
But again, going back to the question about Silicon Valley.
Yes.
And the global north, global south. Does the world need another innovator from Silicon Valley to propose solutions to the climate problem? How do you reflect on that?
I think, I feel a little, I can't think of the word, bold, but in a sense, yes. That is, there's a certain freedom we have in Silicon Valley to think way outside the box. And so I got into this by having my software business in computer chip manufacturing and then doing volunteer work on poverty reduction. And over the decades in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, poverty reduction just went beautifully. The Millennium Development Goals had failures, but they were a wild success. And by 2010, things were plateauing, and especially in climate-stricken areas, like Syria, for example. And as a Silicon Valley person, I looked at, what are people overlooking? And there's a certain arrogance that we have in Silicon Valley where we just normally ask questions that people don't like asking sometimes. Because even when I was at MIT, I would think, those people in Silicon Valley, they know how to solve this. Well, when you're in Silicon Valley, you're not withheld thinking someone else is going to solve it. It's like, you know what? If it's not solved yet, it's our job to think outside the box.
And you've been a little bit critical to the climate sciences, I understand. I mean, and I've done a little bit of sustainability science and climate
you've
work.
done a lot.
So and you've been accused, you've said that climate scientists do not know who their customer is. I'm curious to hear what you mean by that.
Yeah, it was an interesting revelation. I'm a physicist, so I understand, I'm speaking, attacking myself as well. And for me, the breakthrough in climate was at a dinner at one of the COP meetings, one of the climate meetings in Marrakech. And it was a bishop who organized the dinner, and he was lecturing us about how climate is a moral issue. And my physicist brain said, oh, yeah, moral, whatever. And after the second glass of wine, I realized that the science of climate is really interesting. And it will be very interesting no matter what happens. Whether humans go extinct or whether we stay alive, it'll be interesting. Now, as a human, it's a whole different matter. As a human, I want my race, my species to stay alive. And that's a moral issue, not a science issue. And I thought, well, why is it my friends at MIT and Harvard and Stanford and Berkeley and even at the Resilience Center, why are they focusing on just the technological aspects of climate? There's billions of dollars being spent on how to get CO2 out of the air in a way that's good for industry, in a way that's good for the economy. And I realized, well, because it's those businesses that pay the universities, that pay the taxes that the government gives to the university. And for someone your age, for example, I'm a grandfather now, so I'm less worried about my children have gone through college. They're advanced. But when I was your age, I was worried about my career. And I had to do things that people would pay me for, which is industry. And so there's a certain value in us grandfathers and grandmothers and the youth. I love the Fridays for Future because they have nothing to lose. And I'm really calling on the grandmothers and grandfathers and the Fridays for Future to call for restoring the climate because the system brings forth just industry, which is good, but not everything.
We'll actually hear from the youth movement a little later.
Yes.
But then you brought up the issue of finance, which is one of my favorite topics, of course.
Yes.
And we have Cecilia Repinski here. This is one of your expertises as well. So there are several reports, and some of them show that climate tech has grown 5 times faster than investments in other sectors, which is, of course, is promising. So any reflections on that trend? And then where are we now, 2022, in this very turbulent time in terms of climate tech investments?
Well, these investments have to go further, of course, otherwise we will be extinct, and that is a moral issue, as we just confirmed, right? But with the green assets wallet, and the way we see this is that money is energy in the socio-economic ecosystem. So if you direct capital towards unsustainable over-exploitation and fossil fuels, etc., that is what we will grow, and it would tip us over the edge. But if we redirect it towards sustainable and positive value creation in the real economy, that's what will grow. So it's really a prerequisite that we bring capital along this journey of the transition, because otherwise it's not going to work. And that's why I founded the Green Assets Wallet. Our mission is to scale and redirect capital, global capital, towards a better Earth, and make sure that it's scaled, it's redirected, but also that it leads to a credible transition. Because if it doesn't lead to a credible transition, it's not going to help out.
I mean, there have been many promises from the sector in the last years. I would say, so your assessment would be that those promises from the sector to contribute to sustainability, have those been fulfilled from your point of view, or are we even getting close?
I think that I've been working with sustainable finance for 20 years, and I think in the past 7 years or so, something really shifted in the finance sector. And all of a sudden, financial institutions really stepped up, and they wanted to deliver on actual impact in the real economy. And this was new, and this also led to a big surge in the green debt market, because all of a sudden you had this instrument that's really uniquely placed to deliver in the real economy. Otherwise, it's really difficult for financial institutions to ensure that their investments are leading to positive change on the ground. But with bonds and sustainable and labeled bonds, you have those opportunities, because it is earmarked to actual activities. That said, the potential doesn't just automatically translate into being materialized unless you make sure that it does deliver on a credible impact. And I think that in the first wave of the labeled debt market, there was a lot of sort of thankfulness that there is an instrument that can actually do this job. And the second wave from financial institutions was, but wait a second, what is this leading to? I have no idea what impact I'm generating. And you want to understand this because you basically invest in an expensive investment. You provide issuers of green debt with a small premium, so-called greenium. So you, in a way, exchanging a bit of your yield for impact. So what is that impact? What did you actually deliver in the real economy? And I find that the conversation has really shifted. And now our conversation with investors is very much around the credibility of that transition and the credibility of this data, which I find very promising. I don't only think that we should say, okay, so private capital needs to step up, they have a more responsibility. At the end of the day, governments have a responsibility to set up the playing rules for those institutions. And in the financial ecosystem, you have lots of asset managers and then you have asset owners. Most asset owners are pension funds. What are those money? It's our money. It's our responsibility. Have we delivered on our promises? So we can all influence the way capital is redirected.
I think that's a good point. We're going to get back to a related issue to that about phasing out.
Okay.
So not only contributing to green investments, but actually phasing out bad ones. But I want to turn to you, Kewmars. I know I mispronounced your second name before. I'm so sorry about that. I hate it when people do that to me, and now I did it to you. So I really apologize. But there's something about innovation and also about upscaling. You want things to scale. I mean, that's a very common topic whenever you talk about innovation. So tell us a little bit about your company, first of all, and what are the obstacles that you see to scale up innovation?
Yeah. So I just want to say that based on the UN data from 2017, every day we waste 2 million tons of liquids. And that directly pollutes our ecosystem, surface waters or underground waters, because it's hard to discard the liquids, unlike other waste. So Flexpenser will end the liquid waste and also semi-liquid waste. Think of the sunscreens, the medicines, milk in different industries. So the problem is when we open a liquid package, air and contaminants get in. And then it's only a matter of time. It doesn't matter if you close the package, it will, or you put it in the fridge or in a cupboard, it will spoil fast. So that's that's where when we enter, we have a solution that prevents this spoilage, and it also eliminates the use of preservatives. And it came from the university. It's based on science and technology as well. So to your second question, I think the biggest obstacle for us now is to financing, because we have all the knowledge, we have the network and the support here, and international. We have verified our solution with many leading companies internationally, but financing allows us to expand and scale.
So is that the main challenge, financing?
It's the main challenge currently, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to throw in a difficult question, and anyone who wants to jump on board, maybe especially for you, Lisen, by the way. There's something about technology and innovation. There's something called Gibbons paradox, you probably know about. So there is a tendency of innovation to offer efficiency gains, but those efficiency gains get consumed up by more consumption. I mean, you see that for electricity, you see that for cars, etc. How do we break that paradox? I mean, promote innovation without continue to expand on material use and energy use.
And the honest question is, I don't know. But take a product like Kewmars' invention. It really works. Everybody can relate to sunscreen. It says on the back, it's valid for 2 years, but if you open it, you can only use it for 6 months. There's this little symbol. That actually addresses that problem. Would I be buying more sunscreens? Probably not, because the one I have at home works. And maybe then it's down to the essence of the product itself. You will always run the risk of overconsumption, airplane flights, etc., if you make it more accessible. But at the same time, there is an inherent smartness in the right type of products and innovations. I choose to be positive, because we know we have to do this. So I would like to, go on a broad scale and something's got to give, and it is going to be a bit of a Darwinistic approach. The right innovations are going to excel.
What do you think? I'll let you in soon. But Peter, I mean, you talk about removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. How do we know that those innovations are not just going to allow us to postpone the problem?
That is a great question. The key, again, this is part of being from Silicon Valley, is being very clear about who the customer is, which in this case is humanity, and then what they want, which is a sustainable planet to live on, and a sustainable society. And so if you define the problem very carefully, the solutions will naturally include all the variables. So the main way to get carbon out of the atmosphere, not surprisingly, is the same way that nature does it. We have ice ages every 100,000 years. In the last million years, nature has removed that same amount of CO2 that we need to remove 10 times. And we can do the same thing that nature did. And we know that nature has developed the resilience to be able to deal with the ecological changes that happen when the CO2 level goes up and down. And so we can monitor that, keeping an eye on what human beings need. And so, but the trick is, as people, when we start out looking through a very narrow telescope, through a very narrow lens. And then it takes time to be able to expand that to what all of humanity needs. And that just takes a lot of expertise. But you got to keep that expertise in. And my new book, Climate Restoration, the only future that will sustain the human race, works to introduce that idea. You know, especially I hope your Resilience Center takes it on, that for the sustainability of the whole human race.
I think that's key for all of us, especially nature-based solutions and the role of the biosphere. Yeah. Cecilia, you had something related to that.
No, I really think you hit the mark on the nail, really. And I think this is a problem, and it really boils down to our lifestyles. And I can't help thinking we're in such a tough position globally in terms of inflation rates and in terms of, you know, geopolitical issues, etc., etc. It's a really tough period for a lot of people and a lot of households and families, etc. But I also wonder if this will somehow change the way we consume and make us more mindful. So at least something good can come out of this crisis that we're in.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I just wanted to comment on that, and I agree, and I think it's going to be a fine balance there, because it was in the Swedish newspaper this morning that flights heading south this summer are already sold out because everybody wants a nice summer holiday. We are not going to get people to simply stop flying south for warmer temperatures if we know the individual benefit. Now, the collective benefit, as we all agree, is not as good because it's down to the climate, and then it's back to the innovations again. So absolutely, like Cecilia is saying, I do think we will change our patterns, but as we change, we also need these solutions so that it's not going to work to simply ask people to not be flying or not be over-consuming or not buy new products. We have to sort of get those two to go together, because then, I do think we can actually...
It's not an either or. We need all the solutions that we can get, and also change in behavior.
And because what we want to do is ensure the survival of our species, of humanity. And
that would be nice.
Yeah, and that's our job. You know, and we have to remember that. And when you do that, then people will naturally do the right thing regarding flying south, because there's a lot of benefit to flying south. You see new people, you get new ideas. It's not a simple, 20 gallons of jet fuel. It's a whole balance. And as a social being, we integrate that as long as we all align on the flourishing of humanity.
That's great. So we're going to take a very small break, just look at a little video to remind ourselves why we're here and why we're doing this.
We are both creature and moulder of our environment.
The crisis of human environment is a global crisis.
Our capability to transform our surroundings, if used wisely, can bring to all peoples the benefits of development and enhance quality of life. But through ignorance or indifference, we can do massive and irreversible harm to the environment on which our life and well-being depend. We see around us growing evidence of harm. dangerous levels of pollution in water, air, earth, and living beings, major disturbances to ecological balance, distraction and depletion of irreplaceable resources. Millions continue to live below the minimum levels required for a decent human existence. A point has been reached in history when we must shape our actions with more care for their environmental consequences. To defend and improve the human environment has become an imperative for us all, a goal to be pursued in harmony with the fundamental goals of peace, economic, and social development. To achieve this will demand responsibility by citizens and communities, enterprises and institutions at every level in common effort.
It is so decided.
Remember, it is people that propel social progress, develop science and technology, and through their hard work, continuously transform the human environment. We are both creature and moulder of our environment.
Okay, welcome back. So one challenging aspect of innovation, I believe, and this is something that my colleague Per Olsson taught me, he's a transformation expert. He told me that there's so much interest around new innovation and creating new things. But actually one of the key aspects of moving into a different direction is actually to let some things go and phase out. So I want to discuss that a little bit with you in terms of what are the things that you see from your sectors that actually need to be phased out and even more actively. Can we start with you?
You mean in entrepreneurship,
yes, or in your sector, or where you're working now?
Because so we are now focusing on liquid packaging, and I think I'm gonna disagree. I think we need a new thing here, because it has been the industry has been like this since like many decades, near the century, and you know all the packages, they look like each other with the small changes, and that it doesn't help the our climate. So I'm saying that we need a paradigm shift in our industry, and that's what we offer here now.
So that paradigm shift means leaving some old things behind.
Means don't get used to the way that we consume liquids or the product. Be open to a new solution for that. That helps our climate.
So to you, Cecilia, going to you, I think fossil fuel investments, fossil fuel subsidies, deforestation risk commodities.
That is the obvious answer from me. But I'm going to talk in terms of what we do at the Green as a Solid, which is about bringing credible data to the market. And I think what we need to phase out is unreliable sustainability data, because it just fools us. And if we're going to redirect capital towards a sustainable transition, we need quantifiable, verifiable, measurable impact data, what's going on in the real economy. Because we have a sustainability challenge. We know we need to redirect massive amounts of global capital. And when we talk about the sustainability transition and sustainable finance, there's so many qualitative, descriptive scores, etc., going on in this place. And I think what the market really needs is that trusted, credible data. And we need to phase out all other data in order to really hold investors accountable for their investments and for their decisions. And I think that investors are really there. They're driving this now. And they want to know, is this credible? Is this really happening? I mean, the conversations we're having with investors today are really sophisticated around impact data. And they really want to know, is this real? No, this was actually based on a calculation. Then I'm actually going to give that lower value in my decisions, etc., which I think is really promising development. But still, a lot of capital is directed to something we may think is sustainable, when in fact it may not lead to an actual transition. So we need to phase out bad data because it just fools us all.
That's a good point.
That said, I just want to say something. Yeah. We're not perfect at the green as a solid. We strive towards bringing data that is good enough, but we're not perfect. I just want to say that.
No, it's challenging. Data is always challenging. Lisen, what's your take on this? And for a climate tech, for like a hub, innovation hub, what's the role of phase out? What do you need to phase out?
I was inspired. I need to like change my answer and actually build on to what Cecilia was saying. So if we can put monetary value on any consumer products, we can actually understand, and what I'm referring to is a framework that I know Harvard Business School is working on. It's just not finished. So examples I've seen cannot be named, but you have fuzzy soft drinks of a darker color, and they sort of cost the same, they look the same. For me as a consumer, I pay almost the same amount for both of those drinks. But in reality, the cost for the planet, one has twice the size of a footprint than the other one. So I actually like this answer quite a lot. Can we get reliable data, and can we even take a step further? Can we monetize the footprint on products? We can agree. So it's almost like the phase out. That question as well is just so big. We can all agree that we're never going to that we're always going to disagree on the priorities. But if we actually understand the monetary value of it, or it can be another way to measure, but can we just find a way to agree? We can probably agree what to phase out. Because I can come up with 15 examples within every industry we should be phasing out.
Data is powerful. What you measure gets managed.
I agree.
So maybe we need to complement innovation hubs with dismantler hubs or similar. So like actively.
We simply need to continue the road towards data-driven understanding of what is impact. Impact is not just doing good because it feels good.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Peter, what's your take on that? Phasing out.
I love the question. I hadn't thought of it that way. And you know, in my field, you don't get rid of something, you replace it. And the thing that I would replace is the 2-degree warming goal, which was designed to maximize GDP growth with no measurement of human health or even human survivability. Was done by Nobel economists, the 2-degree warming. And the 1.5 degrees, a little bit like that. What we want to do is supplant that with a 0 degrees warming, so an RCP 0, which I hope your institute will work with me to develop. So get a 0-degree goal because we know that's the climate that humans are designed for, and that's what we want. There was a good reason in 1977 for 2 degrees, but it's not 1977 anymore. This is 2022.
That's a radical proposition. I might disagree with some of the details too, but I think it's interesting to discuss also. Another thing that I've been thinking about, and of course as innovators, turbulence and the role of turbulence and the fact that we have, I mean, from 2020 onwards, it's been an extremely turbulent phase in the development of the world through the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. So as a reflection, I mean, from your point of view, what is the role of turbulence and innovation? Does it trigger more innovation, or might it actually stifle innovation in dangerous ways? What's your experience?
So I can relate to Norrsken in Stockholm. The past 2 years, the years that we refer to as Corona, was in many ways quite constructive for a lot of the entrepreneurs that were in the phase of scaling their businesses into an actual market product. Why? Because they are trying to solve a problem. I'm not saying at all that there were beautiful times and everyone were happy, but we saw quite constructive forces coming in because capital like Kewmars was saying, capital seems to be the one priority everybody needs in order to be able to scale. Capital was much more carefully selected, and then it was sort of geared towards the solutions that one could truly understand and believed in. So I'm not saying that it's altogether good, not at all. It's actually quite tough, and it's tough for a lot of people. But I also see that there are positive forces in disruption.
What would you say, Cecilia, what's your experience, I mean, in terms of green investments and the recent turbulence?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the geopolitical situation we're in, we see sort of a bridging phase where investments in fossil might increase for a while, but I think that this is a bridging phase. And in that perspective, it's quite interesting also what's happening in the responsible investment community, and the mandate for what you consider to be sustainable and impactful has changed. And tough questions are being put on the table, such as someone will finance the weapons industry. Who do we want to be on the owners list of those industries? Is it responsible to back out, or is it actually a prerequisite that we have solid democratic governments who are owning these companies? So some of those issues that were sort of in the not invited into the nicer halls of sustainable finance have now been invited. So we see lots of interesting developments. But in terms of climate change, I think that we have a bridging period, but everyone knows we have to shift to sustainable in the long term.
And it's moving. Any reflection on that? Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, the turbulence is a problem everywhere. Flying an airplane, sailing a boat. I used to do a fair bit of sailing, and the wind would shift, and the tides would shift, the current would shift. And the important thing was to keep an eye on where we wanted to go. And one of the wonderful things, as you said, about turbulence is you discover new things, and it opens up new ways of thinking. And you have to keep an eye on where the ultimate place you want to go, which is humanity flourishing.
Kewmars, has this recent time inspired any new thinking?
Of course, I mean, the whole medical industry has flourished because of that. But I think I agree with the whole people here. One other aspect is that it actually, if you're weak in the business, you're not going to be successful because of, if you're a bad boss, for example, your business will go down. And that was a time that, like, to identify, it's good for the consumers and the customers to see which companies can survive this period, and usually they are better. They have to have a better team environment in the company. So that aspect, I think, also has another aspect in the humanitarian think of.
I mean, one of the challenges, I guess, and maybe you can talk about that, Cecilia, is when we've seen the investments during the pandemic, a lot of it went to older models. I think Joe Stiglitz, Nobel laureate in economics, mentioned a few days ago that actually when the capital was allocated, it was only the old industry that was around the table, not the industry of the future. And that's why you saw that pattern. Is there anything, something that you might recognize in terms of how investments moved during the pandemic?
I don't know. I mean, I think that anything that goes to the unsustainable has to shift. And we see in tech that it's really expensive to build wrong. That's why we have like product owners and all of those processes, because it's expensive to back. And I think it's the same way here. I mean, if you invest in infrastructure that sits for 30 years, it's going to be really expensive to back. And it's not going to be something we can keep in the long term. So it's expensive to invest wrong at this stage. We don't have that enough time for those longer term infrastructures to last. It has to be sustainable now.
Yeah, good point. I mean, things that we've discussed, right? So science, the tech sector, the private sector, governments. I thought it might be interesting to hear reflections on the UN system, the United Nations system. But what is the role of an organization such as UNDP and other UN bodies to drive innovation? Have you thought about that? What would be your take on that?
Well, I'm fairly new. I've been involved in climate probably the least of anyone here, just about 8 or 10 years. And what I've discovered is wonderful about the United Nations system is it's a place to meet exactly like this. And a lot of my friends are disappointed that UN does not take action. But we take action when we go home. And I'm very energized from this discussion, and I'm hopefully I will convince you to pursue RCP 0 at your institution out of this, because that's the outcome we all want. The UN's goal, mission, or what UN accomplishes, is these meetings of the mind and meetings of the soul. And it's wonderful for me.
What about you? What's your take on the UN system?
I think I see it very simple. There is no supranational ambition other than the UN in place to date. It's always going to be important. We have the European Union, we have other unions, we have the African unions, but there's no other body that is trying to put everybody around the same table. There will always be strengths and weaknesses in that ambition, but the climate, I mean, we can address it locally, but the solution is going to have to be global. So we need the global body with us.
Cecilia, Kewmars, any take on that, the UN system?
I mean, I think every actor has a role to play, and I think the UN has a really powerful convening power that can be harnessed for this.
Kewmars,
yeah, I just the same. Everyone says everything. I think the best coordinator, like the goals that have been set, has started a movement that we can see. Companies are taking into action what in their decision making see the points that are pointed out by UN. So yeah,
I think one of the key things that are being discussed now at Stockholm +50 that's happening now within the UN conversations is social inequalities and global inequalities. We have 2 more minutes if anyone wants to explore that. I mean, what is the connection between climate innovation and addressing social inequality? Yeah?
Well, in writing my book, The Climate Restoration, I looked at what's the base cause of the climate global warming, and it's really the fact that the human population is 10 times the very stable level we had during that stable last 10,000 years. And in order to provide for the poor, we need to move ourselves back to a stable sustainable population, which turns out, again, since once you define it, becomes very, very achievable with all the structures we have in place. You just need leadership to say we want a sustainable population. And so for me, it's very exciting to discover that when you define numerically the outcome, the solutions cost almost nothing, and they just require leadership and the meeting that UN provides. And thank you for your huge contribution to it.
And all of you. So, any final reflections on equality?
No more than that it's fairly obvious that huge disruptions like war, like the climate problems that we see, they accelerate social inequalities. So I don't know how we would address them straight on, but we need to solve a lot of problems because the macro problems accelerate social inequalities.
Cecilia, any take on that?
I mean, in sustainable finance and impact investment, the social issue is the really tricky part to solve with data. So we struggle there. I mean, our theory of change is to unlock the matching effect between investment and those project developers that deliver impact, and we do that through data. So our theory of change is basically that really credible and impactful actors who find capital easily and be able to negotiate really good terms. So they will actually be the winners who can grow. But how do we make sure that it doesn't have trade-offs with social issues, etc.? And how can we bring that data into the equation? And everyone is talking about the S in ESG and how to find the right data sets to make informed decisions.
Yeah. Very challenging question indeed. We need to wrap up. Thank you so much. Such a wise panel. Thank you so much for your contributions. We need to move over to the next segment. So climate change impacts everyone, but the future belongs to young people. As the grip of climate change tightens, young people are leading efforts to change the future by demanding climate action from the governments. The demands from young people get louder, and youth-led action on climate change is growing strong across the globe. Whether through education, activism, innovation, science, or technology, young people are scaling up their efforts and using their skill to accelerate climate action. So UNDP have asked Clara Henry, Nordic TV personality and actress, if she could interview young leaders on what is happening today in Stockholm +50, and she's responded by bringing them into this stage. So over to you, Clara.
Thanks a lot, Victor. Of course I can. And here I am with two young leaders and entrepreneurs standing right here next to me. Hi, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Hi.
We have Máximo Mazzocco, who is the founder and managing director of EcoHouse Global, an Action for Sustainability youth-led non-profit organization, and Joshua Amponsem, who is the founder of Green Africa Youth Organization, working with the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
I'm very glad to have you here to talk about the conference and give us and the viewers the latest from within it. But let's turn to you first and get to know the both of you. Joshua, where did you arrive from into Stockholm?
I came from Davos. I was at the World Economic Forum, so I arrived from Switzerland, but I'm originally from Ghana.
From Ghana.
Yes.
And what is the most urgent climate issue in your country and region right now?
If I look at sub-Saharan Africa right now, water and food is a very big problem. When we don't have water, it's a crisis. You have drought. When the water comes, it's a crisis because it comes more than we can actually accommodate. So then we have flooding, and that becomes a problem as well. And both drought and flooding is not good for agriculture. So that translates into food insecurity, and that is the biggest challenge we have on the continent right now. Drought, floods, food insecurity.
It's very nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And Máximo, you work with such a large net of volunteers in South America and globally also. Please tell us a bit about that.
Okay, we are part of a youth movement that is called EcoHouse Global. We work in Latin America, and now we are starting some venues in Africa as well. And we have more than 40 projects running, trying to demonstrate that youth can also do it. So that's the main idea, to interact, to get involved, and to act, not only say. The main idea is to act, to do actual things towards sustainability.
Isn't it hard to handle like all these volunteers? Is it a big like project leading job?
We would love to have more resources, but with this crisis being 8 billion people, we need to do what we can from where we can. So our idea is the same as always: think global, act local. We divide ourselves and try to advocate in our homes. And with this process and with this kind of thinking, we already achieve amazing things, and that's what inspires us to do more and more and more.
Welcome here, you two. It's the last day of the 2 days of the conference, Stockholm +50. What's the atmosphere like inside the conference today? Or yesterday, if you were there yesterday?
I was there both yesterday and today.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is, well, you can describe it in many ways. One part of it is that you have a lot of urgency within people. But the atmosphere itself at the place, you don't feel that urgency. So that is something that is very, you sort of question it, right? Where is this going and what is really going to happen? At the same time, like I said, you get urgency within people and that they want to do something. So when you get bilateral meetings or when you sit down to talk to any of the stakeholders, you can really tell that, there is a common agreement that we are late. And we need to take things forward. For the youth movement, there are a lot of young people in Stockholm right now for the strike, of course, but also within the conference venue itself. The major group for children and youth within the UN has mobilized a lot of young people, brought them here. They have a youth statement that's going to go out. But at the same time, there is not enough integration of what youth demands are versus what governments are going to do. And later on today, we're hoping that when the youth statement goes out, there'll be a lot of government that will raise their hand to say that, okay, we're not just going to listen to the statement, but we would work with you to implement some of these statements. So for me, the atmosphere now is that we all agree that we are fundamentally late. We need to take action. Individuals are agreeing, but the system is not demonstrating that urgency. And that is what I see. Yeah.
How about you, Máximo?
I feel more or less the same as the last COP. This feels like a mini COP, but non-official. So the members of the state, it's like they're preparing for the next official stuff and binding stuff. But when I talk to them, I see them a little bit more relaxed, you know? Like, this is like a meeting, okay, let's talk more about it. The plenary was the same speeches that I've been listening since 13 years ago. I'm saying this not in a bad way. It's like my humble opinion, no? We already know that we have to act. It's the slogan of every COP, of every of these kind of events. But what I like to say that is very important is the role of the youth. That it's very impressive. We always say this, but it's important to highlight that we are growing in numbers and we are trying to organize ourselves and getting resources, and every day we are more and more, and we already like decide more or less where we want to go. And the atmosphere inside, I totally agree with Joshua. We don't feel like the urgency when we are talking, because in my hometown, half of population is poor. It's not like we are talking totally relaxed in something that we had to do with many contradictions, of course, because of diversity. But I believe that we need new mechanisms and, of course, get youth more involved in those tables, in those speeches, in those plenaries, and not only youth. Vulnerable communities and indigenous people. A lot of indigenous people didn't didn't came to the venue, and we have to say that. Sorry.
But so we're experiencing a crisis, and the most vulnerable and most affected group are the youth people, or the young people and the youth. From a youth perspective, what is demanded for these people in power to actually make a difference and make a change?
I have a session earlier today in the venue. We had a session together with the Dutch Minister for Environment and other decision makers, with young people from around the world. And the answer to this question for many young people is that access to decision making. Every decision, whether it's COP, whether it's here, like you said, if all of them is rested on the shoulders of the ministers and they do not have any close relationship with the youth, we have our demands, they have what they want to do. In the end, the future that is being created for young people is created without them and without their input. And there's this common saying that nothing about us without us. So for me, the starting point of what demand is really needed now is, how do we get power to the people? How do we get power in terms of decision making? Okay, we know that the climate crisis is here. We know biodiversity crisis is here. And ministries are updating their national determined contributions, the national adaptation plan, the SDGs reviews. How are young people contributing to that process to make sure that the next budget for the country, in terms of addressing this ecological crisis, is enough to pay attention to the needs of young people? And if that decision-making process do not include young people, everything else that we say, it doesn't fit into a mechanism, because all the mechanisms are already made. The ministry has their portfolio for the next 5 years. It's concluded. Then they have to go and review. We don't have a chance to sit at the table. If we get a seat to the table, sometimes even the people who sit at the table are not even educated, capacitated, and not empowered enough to make a meaningful input. It ends up with a nice photograph that gets posted to say that, the minister and this high-level person met with these young people. End of story. How do we really translate power to young people so that we can move? One, advocacy is being on the street to campaign, but one is also sitting down with the decision makers to really make a joint decision about what needs to be done. So for me, the starting point is trusting young people with power and with the decision-making mandate that they can really work with institutions to co-create a better future.
Máximo, has there been any good outcomes of these past 2 days?
I would say that, of course, we are like trying to... Sometimes it appears that we criticize everything, but I believe that we are moving forward in sometimes baby steps and in some places in big steps. I have to say that also because we are trying very hard as human beings. We need to understand that this is a transition because we cannot do it from one day to another. We just said we are 8 billion people. 8 billion people have to change habits and way with different cultures. The only thing we have in common is diversity as human beings. So we need to work with that. That's why there are so many contradictions, and that's why we need sometimes to see the big picture and try to be in this kind of events and invest in youth to be in these events, because when we talk face to face with the decision makers, it's totally different, the conversation, and when you listen in the press or in a video. I will give a very simple example. I talked to one decision maker, member of state president, and he told me in my face, literally, he told me, hey, you need to understand that we really don't know exactly how to tackle climate change. You need to understand that. And with that honesty in my face, now I work in a different way, because we act. That's our proposition. And the proposition of act is make proposals. Okay, here are the ideas that actually can work to change this, to transform society in the next couple of years, not in one day. So, okay.
I love the engagement and the fire, and I really think that youth can be the change, and we need the diversity to actually create a change. So is there anything you would like to say to the young people watching this right now who might feel powerless in this very urgent situation?
Well, I'll say that nothing can be achieved without hope. And we've seen progress, as Máximo said. At the same time, please don't lose hope and don't lose the urgency to demand. We need to keep demanding, we need to keep asking, and we ourselves need to keep acting. So that is my message to everyone. Act, demand, and keep hope alive. Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree totally with Joshua. And I would say that please investigate as youth. We need to know what is going on. We need to share in every space we can. That means family, friends, in our work, in every role, in every career we are studying. And for me, from my humble opinion, is we need to start thinking in solutions, not only demands. It's like, let's go work, think together intergenerationally and say, this is the path, and push, and push. We cannot stop pushing because we know what is at stake. We really know what is at stake. So don't lose hope, please. Let's keep working together. We are millions right now, and we will millions next year, more and more and more.
And one last thing, get into politics. Like really, I mean, if you want to have any chance of making those radical changes, you got to be the decision maker. So for those who have interest, those who don't have interest, we should all be interested into politics. We should become politicians, and we should make the changes that we are actually asking for.
Thank you both. Final question. What's next? What do we bring to COP27?
I would say that we will try to be the more than possible. It's in Egypt. There are some complications, as usual, in every venue. Last year, we know it was impossible to get there for a lot of people. We will try to make the effort and have resources, so we say here we are. But the question and the answer for me is going to be always the same right now. Implementation and financial. Let's see financement. We have to see a way and look some way to really get to the point and start doing what we need to do and act locally. That's so important. We are always talking about the global crisis, but we need to see what's going on around us and start acting there. If we do that, changes, we can see changes, and that also gives us more energy to grow and expand and do it regionally, etc. That's how we start, and now we are more than 500 organizations in Latin America and the Caribbean working together, doing amazing things.
I think from my side, COP27 urgency. We are already too late, we know that, and I want to feel that heat with everybody coming to COP, that it has to be now or never. Then the second part is COP is only an event. It's 2 weeks of an event. You cannot really do much. The actual work is what you do at home. So before you start preparing for COP and planning all of that, please make sure that you are rooted with your constituency, with your mayors, with your local government. Get them, sit down, have a plan, how you're going to implement action. And COP is a place to just demonstrate that. But really, the actual work is what you do with your community and your leadership at home. So let's invest in that and let's do more of that. And we can come to COP and learn from each other, network, and go back and do the work at home.
Wonderful last words. Thank you so much, Máximo, Joshua, for coming here and giving us your update and analysis. Victor, back to you.
Thank you so much, Clara. That was amazing. And thank you for joining us. The next Stockholm +50 Climate Hub session is on Sunday. It will be a special session for World Environmental Day. Your host of the day will be Clara Henry again. And the session will focus on youth activism to achieve change. So see you Sunday at noon. Thank you very much.